We have the ambition to build the Rolls Royce of electric aviation, and it is going to be as influential to society as the invention of jet engine and jet travel. That's what all of us truly believe. If you look at AI, for example, regulations are developing in parallel to the technology, maybe lagging behind. In the world of aviation, if something breaks or crashes, it's not like a server reset or shut the website down for a day. VCs are tricky in that not all VCs um, are suited to a business like this. And so, what I've found really key is fundraising all the time. Whoever invented the Y Combinator safe, hats off to that person. That's come very handy, and is a really powerful way of making things happen quickly, because prize rounds do take a long time. You want to do a prize round at a certain major inflection point for the company. Being in the UK was beneficial because in the aerospace sector, if you are in the US, it falls under what is called the ITAR regime that prevents people who are not US citizens to work in the aerospace and defense sectors. A lot of my batchmates, after doing PhDs or masters, they weren't able to work in places like Boeing or SpaceX or so on because they didn't have a green card or a citizenship. There are startup labs and sort of manufacturing facilities in my space that I've seen in India that will shock the West, literally.
That's
It's not
incredible.
talked about yet.
Yeah.
It's people don't know about it yet, and in 5 years it'll be an overnight success.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Svagat Show. I've got an awesome guest with me. Welcome, Anmol. Thank you
Hi,
so
Rishabh.
much. So, Anmol Manohar. I got introduced to Anmol via a common friend, and we just started talking, and it was just incredible to learn about his journey. Anmol is the founder of a company called Greenjets in Milton Keynes, not very far from London. Greenjets is they're just doing something really awesome. They are building industrial grade jet engines for commercial industrial and military drones. And I'll let him share more. But thank you so much, Anmol, for coming on to the show.
Thanks, Rishabh. That was a perfect intro. The only correction or addition would be the word electric. So our technology focuses entirely on electric jet engines or electric propulsion, as opposed to traditional jet engines that use fuel.
Yeah, just walk me through. I mean, growing up in India, obviously, you see a lot of people enter on the software side. You decided to, build something on the hardware side. What led to you starting Greenjets?
I grew up in a military family in India, in the Indian Navy. So grew up around warships, aircraft carriers, all kinds of things, helicopters, and so on. So had an inclination for you could say mean machines or extreme machines for sure, and with a passion for, I guess, mathematics and physics, like many of my sort of peers at the time. I got into IIT Kharagpur doing a bachelor's in aerospace engineering. Like everyone else at IIT, nobody touches your books, so that was me as well. So spent many years there doing everything but studies, and almost went down the path, the sort of normal path of consulting and startups and so on. And it was only in the last couple of years that I got fed up with all of that and decided to carry on with the passion of engineering and sort of mean machines again. So unlike sort of all of my peers at the time, I decided to focus on uh, Formula One actually, and spent the last year at uni just focused on trying to get into that industry. Obviously, being in India, it's not an industry that's around. So I actually decided to that the route for me would be to move to the UK, because at the time 9 or the 11 teams were based in the UK, and so I knew a path to directly get into Formula One from IIT wouldn't be possible, so I decided to do a master's. And there were really three universities in the UK that directly fed engineers into the Formula One world, and that was Imperial, Cranfield, and Southampton. So got into all three. Decided to go to Imperial College, and that's really how the journey to UK happened from India. And then sort of fast forward a year after my master's, getting into Formula One wasn't as appealing as it was sitting in India. I realized that industry isn't where innovation is happening as rapidly, and as uh, it was more evolution than revolution. And so decided to work in the aerospace industry, which was again what my master's was in, and joined Rolls Royce in the UK. Spent a few years at Rolls Royce. That led into me getting into electric aviation, spending a lot of years there doing R&D. Would love to tell you more about those projects. And then through that journey, decided to form Greenjets as a company. Basically, today, if I had to, in a very short summary, say what we are doing, we are we have the ambition to build the Rolls Royce of electric aviation. Electric aviation is the third revolution in aerospace, and it is going to be as influential to society as the invention of jet engine and jet travel. That's what all of us truly believe.
Why is that?
So what did jet engines do? So the first 30, 40 years of aviation was propeller driven, using internal combustion engines. And those aircraft could only get to a certain speed and a certain height and a certain range. When jet engines came on board, it opened up a new era of aviation because suddenly you could travel a lot faster, a lot higher, a lot further. And so suddenly intercontinental travel, from say the US to all the way to the Far East, all of those became possible. Suddenly the world got connected in new ways that weren't possible earlier. Electric aviation is the next paradigm. So is it going to make aviation faster or longer range or higher? Not really, but it will make aviation cleaner. And that's something aviation has to do because it's one of the hardest sectors to decarbonize amongst all the sectors around today. And I can tell you more about why that is. So, electric aviation will make aviation cleaner for sure, but it'll also introduce uh, new forms of transportation to society that didn't exist earlier. So, drones, for example, are a classic example of the earliest stage of electric aviation, where you can get medical deliveries, you can gather intelligence and data in ways that weren't possible earlier. When you scale that up to larger vehicles, electric vehicles such as air taxis and so on, you have the idea of Uber in the sky, so getting across cities electrically in one of these aircraft, replacing helicopters today, and in a sort of quiet and sustainable way. So opening up sort of new ways of transportation that didn't exist earlier. So that's why we think electric aviation would be the third revolution in aerospace, quite a large disruption to how transportation happens today. And it needs a set of technologies that don't exist in the previous era. Amongst them is propulsion, in the form of electric aviation, but also autonomy. So that's a completely different area that's also being worked on. So we are solving, you could say, the first problem of how these vehicles would be powered, how they would generate thrust. That's sort of the premise of the company. Is if we go sort of 30, 40 years into the future, we want to be powering those aircraft that enable completely new use cases.
Got it. What are the experiences that lead you to start something like this? When I saw your team, right, it's not a bunch of generalists, right? There are very, very specialized folks, a lot of people with gray hair, people who've spent, a decade or more, people with multiple PhDs, very different from when you look at a lot of companies, like even companies in the AI space, for example, right? Like there's almost a debate right now in AI where you're like, you might not need as many PhDs as machine learning engineers and stuff. It's very
Hmm.
application driven, right? But I'm just wondering how the engine, the jet propulsion space is different, because like your team is like it looks legit, right? Like there's people from Rolls Royce, there's people from Bluebird, which was the spin out from I think Rolls Royce, which then got acquired by Saab. There are people who've had experience in Formula One. I mean, like it's it's like Avengers, right? All of them in Milton Keynes.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
would love to learn a little bit about that.
So, having a credible team is at the heart of being able to create a successful company here. And the reason for that is aviation has always been heavily regulated. If you look at AI, for example, regulations are developing in parallel to the technology, maybe lagging behind.
Yeah.
But in aviation, you already have a very rigorous regulatory process to introduce even small changes to aircraft. So you cannot get to market without going through very, you could say, very deliberate efforts towards certification, regulation, and so on. And their experience has to count. You can't do that without experience. If you don't have engineers who have been there, done that, certified large aircraft, traditional jet engines, and all the difficulties that come with it, you'd never get to market. You can't get something out there and test it. In the world of aviation, if something breaks or crashes, it's not like a server reset or shut the website down for a day.
You can't move fast and break things, as Mark Zuckerberg said
Absolutely
in
not.
aviation.
Absolutely not. Yes. This is where you have to get it right first time. You have to go through the due process where your not only your product needs certification, the way it's manufactured needs certification, the way it's designed needs certification, the team that's developing it needs, as an organization, needs to be certified. And so you have to bring that experience in from the first day onwards. And so I was just fortunate enough to spend enough years in the industry to bring some of these really experienced engineers together. Some of whom worked with me in the past, some of whom worked with my co-founder, Dr. Guido Monterzino, and that is a prerequisite to succeed here. You cannot succeed in this space without doing so.
Yeah, it was awesome meeting Guido a couple of weeks back. I mean, he just looks like the cutest man ever. But like, he starts talking, and like his resume is like 5 minutes long, right? Like, it's just incredible. Could you speak about how you guys met?
Sure. So we met at Blue Bear. So this is the company that Greenjets spun out of, that later got acquired by Saab. So it was a small R&D company that was basically involved in drone R&D, research and development. And Guido and I, we started working on electric propulsion while we were at Blue Bear together. He was the head of engineering, and I had just joined from Rolls Royce. And we had lots of good ideas that sort of came together, and um, we managed to secure. At that point when we met, we really were not clued into the world of venture and starting a company and so on. So we actually decided to build on our ideas via grants from the UK government. We together won 2.74 million pound grant from the UK government while we were at Blue Bear together, to really kick off all of this activity, the foundational science and engineering behind the company. And a year into this funded project, which is still carrying on today, is when Greenjets spun out of that company. So Guido and I had built a team there of around 10 to 12 engineers who joined Greenjets, and we have hired 10 more since then.
I'll come to the grants. Very interesting part of how you build a very capital intensive sort of business, right? But like about Blue Bear, what is it? Because when I was reading about it online, it was being portrayed as this AI company. I saw a lot of mention of the word AI because it was literally like Saab acquires AI powered something something. You know what I'm talking about? Like,
Sure. So Blue Bear does not and did not do propulsion before we started this initiative. What Blue Bear does is swarming technology for drones. So how to drone 500 drones work in harmony with each other on a mission without any human input. That is you could say the secret sauce at Blue Bear, which has come with around 20 years of R&D, starting in the late 90s. So
And
AI
what are
is a
the
huge.
applications of things like that? Is it like, I can obviously understand military would be an obvious application, but what are some of the other, where would you need a bunch of drones working in harmony
So
with each other?
coming back to the idea of electric aviation and autonomy go hand in hand. So if you imagine Amazon drones delivering goods in sort of a vast urban area, they are not going to each drone is not going to have a pilot sitting somewhere in a remote control station operating each of those drones. They would all need to work independently, autonomously. And so the softwares that needs to support that needs to be really robust. It needs to be heavily reliant on AI as well. And some argue that autonomy in aviation is easier than cars, because you have 3 degrees of freedom as opposed to two on a road. And there's a lot more space for you to work with as opposed to on the ground. So that's where AI comes in. It's a very software dependent problem to be solved in order for thousands of these vehicles to be flying around in urban areas.
Got it. And so that, no, it makes perfect sense. In fact, it reminds me of when I was working at Grey Orange. We used a lot of similar concepts because at Grey Orange we had a fleet of autonomous ground vehicles or bots which were in a warehouse trying to coordinate with each other. And the idea was, rather than have a warehouse filled with people walking around picking and sorting and all of that stuff, if you had people at the periphery, and instead you had a bunch of robots which were just, coordinating with each other, taking the racks, moving them about, then you could do much better space utilization and efficiency, and that became an even bigger value add in economies where, the cost of personnel was extremely high, or like, you could only have x number of shifts or things like that. So makes a lot of sense. Coming to the financing part, right? How does one, like you mentioned grants, I'd love to understand, like, how does one even think of starting this company? How does the finance part of it work? Because I think it's as a software company, you sell PPTs, or you might be able to whip up a MVP or a demo. People just go around, throwing capital in the early days. You could get started with as little as 500K or a million, whatever, right? Like maybe even lesser. Like if you look at some of the accelerators, they give as low as 100K USD. Obviously, that doesn't seem like the case with a startup like Greenjets, right? So, like, how does one think about financing such a business?
It's a very challenging problem when you do hardware and when you do hardware in a regulated environment. And at the earlier stages, you need to have the freedom to experiment with the technology, which you don't get when you go down the VC route very early on, because you have to find product market fit immediately. You need to test with customers immediately, see what's working. You just can't do that in aviation. It takes years of research and then years of product development and certification before you can actually start selling products. And the drone industry might shorten that time scale quite a lot, but it's still quite long. Looking back now, I can say grants were better, and it was the right thing. But that was the only option I had at the time. I really didn't. I wasn't exposed to the world of VC at that point, and the UK has a really good grant, you could say, organization called Innovate UK that supports early stage R&D such as ours. And they also have the Aerospace Technology Institute that enables funding specifically into this sector, because it's one of the most important sectors for the UK. In fact, UK has the second largest aerospace industry in the world after the US. And so it's very important for them to promote innovation and so on. So because of my industry experience, I was aware of all this, and while at Rolls Royce, I was already part of many grant funded projects that Rolls Royce had secured. And so the natural choice for me at a very early stage where there's so much risk, in technology, you have TRL cycles, and TRL 9 is when you get to market. TRL 3 to 6 is when you are going from an idea to a prototype, and so on. So VC is not the right model when you need to get to TRL 6, and so grants are the ideal source in this kind of a sector. and we continue taking grants because the timelines to market are quite long. So you need more capital than what VCs can get to you, and so we constantly look at grants that are aligned to our vision and the technology.
Are there challenges when you go with grants? Because they tend to be project based as opposed to VC or even debt, which is just like here's the capital and now you go figure it out, right? Like how does one? What's the right way to, as a founder, right? When you're thinking about tapping the grants market, like what's the right way to approach it?
Right way to approach it, I would say, is to not um, try and win a grant and build a project around winning a grant. It's to understand what you want to do as a company and where you want to get to, and understand the increments in technology that you are going to go through as a team. And if those increments in technology are aligned to what a grant offers or a grant competition offers, then apply for it. So don't do it for winning a grant, but do it because it's aligned to what you want to do. And finding that alignment is not easily achievable all the time. So Innovate UK has at least 20-25 competitions open at all points at any time, and you might not have a project that applies to any of those competitions at a given time. You need to wait for the right opportunity, and you need to go in with a very specific, well aligned project that aligns well to the grant competition and to your vision and to your roadmap. And then and that's when it's the right way to do it. Where I've seen it going wrong is you try and win a grant, and you create a project plan that takes you down a path that is not going to get you to market faster, or you go for a competition that's so generic and so competitive that you sort of the chances of winning it are very low. And so I've seen a lot of founders who give up on grants because they've never managed to crack one. So I think that's the key thing, and you should never rely only on grants for sure. So we have made sure that we had a healthy mix of venture and grants in the early stage until customer revenue kicks in.
One of the big challenges that happens in hardware is that you get way too diluted early on before you even hit commercialization, or you're just sort of caught up in this grant business, and like it's obviously extremely important, but like if that's the only source of funding, then it can get a little tricky, right? Or you might end up trying to find revenue too early, which can lead you to sort of substandard sources of revenue, right? So like would love for you to share just how you went about the whole financing process, and what kinds of people get excited for businesses like these, right? Because my sense is that there's a huge pool of private investors and venture capitalists and angels, and this isn't a space that the average person would understand. And so how do you as a founder think about, what kinds of people would resonate with an idea like this?
Sure, sure. As everyone says, the best form of finance is customer money. So any day, I would consider that to be the best form. But obviously, early stage of a company, hardware, regulatory driven, it's very hard to get customer money early on. So as I said, grants were super helpful in getting us going, but they could do come with the constraint of not really getting you to TRL 9. They get you to TRL 6 7. So TRL 6 7 to 9 is really where other forms of capital make sense. So TRL 7 is when you've proven a prototype or a demonstrator, and you've found enough customer interest where they say, if you made this into a full fledged product, we would buy it. So I've always looked for that, in sort of waiting for that moment to then raise venture capital. Don't do it earlier. Get the prototype working, get some customer interest, get some letters of support and some early revenue if possible, and then go to VC saying this is the sort of capital I need to then capitalize on that opportunity that I have. So in VCs are tricky in that not all VCs um, are suited to a business like this. And so what I've found really key is fundraising all the time. So I've seen lots of advisors and people saying, and founders saying, You raise around and then go into company building for 12 months and then surface back outside, and then go fundraising for the next round and forget about everything else, just focus on the fundraise. I've found that approach not working for me. And the reason for that is, in this kind of a business, you need to find the right investors who are tuned into this sector, tuned into hardware, tuned into the challenges you face here, and are still excited by it. So that's a rare combination to find. You'll find the generic sort of SaaS investors being the most easily available, but they invest in a sector like this only when there's FOMO. Like, okay, I'll do this because everyone seems to be wanting to do this. So you need to find the right investor because they stay with you for a 10-year, 15-year journey, even if they write you a small check. So I always fundraise. I say that I spend 30% of my time or 20% of my time always trying to meet new investors, and they may not invest in me at this stage. They might be the right investor for another stage that's to come, maybe a year down the line or 2 years down the line. So I've found investors getting most excited and investing in the business when they have known us for a year and seen the progress we have made, not just taking us. I'm not found sort of the 2 week fundraise as something possible in this space, because it's you really need to understand the business before you sort of get conviction on investment. So yeah, so that is my mode of tackling this is always fundraise and then find the right point where you're crossing an inflection point. You've reached TRL 6 7 for a certain product category, and then you want to take that product category to market, and you need venture capital. That's when you do it.
And so that's where constructs like safe rounds or convertibles work well, because you're not having to like figure out the valuation at every few months, right? Because otherwise that would just be like a crazy amount of paperwork and stuff like that.
For sure. Whoever invented the Y Combinator safe, hats off to that person. That's come very handy, and is a really powerful way of making things happen quickly, because prize rounds do take a long time, and it's something you don't want to be doing all the time. You want to do a prize round at a certain major inflection point for the company. You don't want to be doing that every few months.
Yeah. I wanna dig deeper into one of the things that you mentioned, which is around UK being the second largest aerospace market. Like, I don't know, it just never occurred to me. I would have thought it would have been, China, or maybe even France. But what are some of the big European aerospace companies, and what causes the market to be so big? Because obviously, as a country, it's small.
Sure. So, I mean, if you look back to the last 100 years of aviation, the jet engine was invented here. And out of that invention, Rolls-Royce was created as a company which is amongst the top three jet engine manufacturers worldwide. And for wide body aircraft, which is a huge market, they go hand in hand with sort of GE in terms of market share. And then if you look at the aircraft side of things, the first commercial jetliner was also came out of the UK. There have been many firsts. So the Concorde was a joint UK France development, and several sort of iconic military aircraft, from the Eurofighter more recently to the BAE Typhoon to a whole range of military aircraft from the past have all come out of the UK. So it's always been an epicenter for aviation from the earliest days. And if you look to today, Rolls-Royce is still one of the few engine makers in the world with a huge presence here. Airbus has a huge presence here. All of the Airbus wings are made in the UK. Landing gears. So there's these huge components that we fly around in are all made in the UK, and so it's a huge industry that is highly regulated. So that's why it's not easy for other people to sort of, just the regulatory environment is not existent in places like China to certify aircraft and to certify parts. The talent base is not there. That's how UK has retained that ability. If you look at all of Europe combined, yes, Europe is probably bigger than the UK. But if you look at specific pockets within Europe. So Germany, France, for example, these are other epicenters, you could say, where the industry is pretty large. So it's a one-off. It's a unique crown jewel for the UK government, which is why in the 1970s they also bailed out Rolls-Royce when it went through financial trouble. So it's a very precious industry to the country.
Very cool. It's related to that is obviously I found you very, as a founder, I've always found you very deliberate. Uh, like having studied in Europe, obviously when you hear about a lot of new innovation happening in at least over the last decade or so, right? There has been this renewed interest in defense tech, or like Andreessen came up with this thesis of American dynamism. You're seeing a lot of space now. A big part of that is obviously driven by space tech, but obviously such innovations have sort of a strong root in military and defense and things like that, right? I'm just wondering what caused you to start this company in the UK. Like, it is the second biggest market, but it's not the biggest market. That's obviously the US, and US has now companies like Anduril and obviously SpaceX. In many ways, if you think about Palantir, also sort of massive work with governments. I'm just wondering if there were any specific reasons that made you choose UK as opposed to US. It's also not a very common route, right, for Indians. I mean, I like to joke how all of us randomly from India land up in Europe. The plan is always the US. So just wanted to, hear your thoughts on that.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, when I look back, it all looks very deliberate, but I've actually been very fortunate and just been at the right place at the right time all along. At the time, with all of these decisions, I couldn't have, planned like a 10-year path that I'll get to where I am. It just makes sense when I look back, but whatever I did at each point was the easiest step for that point. So I came to the UK for Formula One. That was the only thing I wanted to do. Uh,
Silverstone.
and I didn't consider the US at all because Formula One didn't exist there. But actually, being in the UK was beneficial because in the aerospace sector, if you are in the US, you immediately get it falls under what is called the ITAR regime, which is sort of a regulation that prevents people who are not US citizens to work in the aerospace and defense sector. So, if I look at a lot of my batchmates, for example, who went to the US, after doing PhDs or masters, they weren't able to work in places like Boeing or SpaceX or so on because they didn't have a green card or a citizenship. So that completely doesn't exist in Europe straight away. So straight away after a 1 year masters, I was able to join, you could say, the leading propulsion company in the world
So
because it
you're
was
telling
non
me there's no one with an H1B in SpaceX?
no.
Wow, I didn't know
If
that.
you look at any job they have advertised and you go down to the fine print, it would say you have to be a US citizen or a green card holder.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, so that's that's a good reason then to start in the UK. Any
Yeah.
any
So
other
going
thoughts?
beyond that, I
Yeah.
mean, founding a company is like way that's a much bigger step. Just can't even get into the industry. Forget about founding a company within it. So all of those restrictions don't exist here. There are obviously export control regulations that we all need to comply to, but it's not as harsh as the US. I'm still an Indian national, but I'm able to, have a company that's sort of at the cutting edge of this industry, and there's a mechanism to do that here. It doesn't exist in other places.
Got it. And what about like once you start building out the company and stuff, are there, certain advantages that you can have in terms of who you can sell to, or, at some point if you think about M&A or whatever, right? Like, are there certain benefits that Europe offers just from a commercial perspective beyond talent?
Sure, I think from a commercial perspective. So obviously, talent base. There's an incredible talent base here in the aerospace industry that is available commercially. The export control regulations here are very well established, and that's because there's a very vibrant industry for the last 50 years that has been exporting worldwide. So that's very easy for us in terms of being able to sell into, say, South Korea or Taiwan or India. There are mechanisms and ways in which you can do so. An example, for example, in the Indian drone ecosystem that I'm also very closely working with, the regulations around, say, Indian drone companies to be selling drone systems outside the country is still in its early infancy, in its very early days. So you could say that is a useful advantage that I have commercially. From an M&A private equity sort of perspective, yes, I guess the people who are interested in what we are doing from an exit perspective are the big aerospace primes. And if you are either working close to them in terms of geography or working with them directly, the odds of them catching their attention are higher. So, Airbus, Boeing, BAE Systems, MBDA, all of these large aerospace and defense primes are based in Europe. So strategically, it's beneficial to be here as well.
Got it. Got it. Interesting. It's on the topic of you can build it, but then you need to sell it. I come from the SaaS world, right? Both enterprise and PLG, and obviously go to market is done in a certain way, right? Where you talk about it, you have a community, start selling in certain ways to individuals, and move over to larger accounts. How does go to market work with engines and drones, and like what? How does one get to sell these products?
Maybe you should ask me in a year or so, Rishabh, when we are selling in volume. So I guess I'm on a journey with that. I don't have all the answers yet. And we are only, as of late last year, commercially selling our products and services to people. So still very early days for Greenjets in that
Yeah.
on
But
that
is it very
front.
relationship driven, or like I know there's obviously a bunch of large industry events like DroneX and stuff like that. I would imagine there might be like newsletters, or like how does one just meet potential buyers in this industry? Like do you just go like hire some old man who's who's done this for 50 years and they just have like the Rolodex? Is that how it works? Like would love any insights on what you've seen so far, either currently or even in the past experience at Blue Bear. Or
Sure, sure. So, who's eventually using drones, right? It's the sort of various armed forces, blue light services like police and ambulance and so on. Big corporates, for example, National Rail, if they want to have a drone network to sort of survey their entire railway infrastructure and so on. So these are the end users eventually of these products. And then you have the next tier below them, which is the people who make these systems, make various airframes with engines and all other components. And then you have the component suppliers who make everything from batteries to motors to power electronics. So depending on what you're selling and where you lie on this tier, you need to have different strategies. So if you are a complete system provider, you it's very relationship based. You need to have really close relationships with the end users, good lobbying channels, sales channels, and so on. If you are a component supplier, you have to play a completely different game, and so on. So it really depends on what you're selling within the ecosystem. What we are selling is requires we are selling basically capability that doesn't exist with today's drones. So we are selling drones that can be 5 times faster than what flies today. We are selling drones that can be 3 times quieter. We are selling drones that can be so that's the capability we are selling as a company. Our engines enable
even
those
larger drones, right? Because you've got some powerful engines. These aren't the hobby
absolutely.
propeller
So
style
yeah,
drones that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So these are next generation systems basically that are faster, can carry more payload, can be quieter, can be more efficient, can be more reliable. That's what we are selling. So a huge part of our sale is getting people aware that these kind of capabilities are coming. The end users need to know that this technology is evolving. So there's a whole piece around making people aware of this new capability, and that comes by finding, as you said, graybeards in the industry who have those connections into the right places, and then you then also need to um, uh, once people end users know what capability you can offer, you then also need to build the systems that they can use and sell them. And so you need to work with systems integrators as well to get that capability in their hands. So it's very relationship based. It's like knowing who the players are, working very closely with them. Greenjets is not going to have 50,000 customers worldwide. We would rather have 100 to 200, but very close relationships with them in order to sell capabilities. So that's very different in the way maybe how we operate to maybe a B2B company, a SaaS
And
company, for
and
example.
how does the business model work? Like in a SaaS company, obviously there's land and expand, and you just add more seats or you increase usage. That's how revenue works. How does it work in if you don't have 50,000 customers? So obviously it's going to be an enterprise kind of a sale, but like how does, because we're talking about physical products here, right? Like how what are the business models in a Greenjets kind of a, like what drives revenue?
So how this industry works is there's a refresh on the systems every 1 to 2 years.
Why
So
is
there's
that?
almost, because as I said, the technology is evolving so quickly. So today, when you have a Boeing aircraft, for example, or an Airbus aircraft, that when you buy it, you assume that it'll work reliably for 30 years, and you assume that it won't be obsolete in say 5 years time. There'll still be very useful needs for it for the next 20 years or so. With drones, if you buy something today, most likely in 3 years, there's something that can carry double the payload at half the cost, or it can go faster, or it's evolving very rapidly. So the business model is still to be figured out by the industry at large, and I think the idea has to be more around capability that evolves, not the platform necessarily, but you basically offer capability, and the capability evolves with time. So basically, upgrades to to the end user is what you offer, as opposed to just here's your engine, sort of here's what you need for 2 years, and when things change, you'll have the next best thing.
Very cool. Very cool. Which and obviously as you sort of unlock more use cases, or as the world figures out more use cases, right? Like this obviously then continuously, like what I'm thinking about is that, like, as a founder, do you ever think about, do we have a large enough TAM or addressable market? Like, is that something that even plays in your head, or you're like convinced that this is, it's already big enough, or like it's inevitable that, like I don't need to convince someone that, hey, this is a big game that's going to happen, and it's really more just about, say, the technology, or the adoption, or things like that.
Sure. So I think we all believe that this is a huge opportunity, but if you look at aviation from say 100 years ago, there wasn't any VC sort of model in the way it got built, and it took decades for it to get built to what it became eventually and what it has become today. And so that becomes a conflict in a way, in that you want to be here for the long game in a way, and you don't want to necessarily fit into a model that needs you to deliver in the short frame, because the industry is not going to develop like that. It will take its time, and just the jet engine, though it was first flown in the early 1940s, the first commercially operating jet aircraft was in the late 50s, right? That's like almost 2 decades before which it became a widespread sort of commercially successful product. So obviously, timelines will be a lot shorter here because everything is moving a lot faster. But that's sort of fundamentally the way we see it. Is this industry will eventually become very big, and it'll have lots of different sectors, from small drones, large drones, air taxis, regional aircraft, and they'll all come in a sequence that we cannot predict. But our goal is to see what is happening today, what's happening tomorrow, close enough into the future that's real today, and solve problems there. So we don't want to solve air taxis problems today, because that's still 5 to 10 years away. Let's focus on the industry today and what how big it is and what it is doing. And we know the problems that exist today that we need to solve with what we are building. And as it evolves, we'll solve the problems that come later. That's the way we want to tackle it, which may not be something that everyone is comfortable with as an investor.
And how have you seen the space evolve? Because it's obviously a very new space. How have you seen the space evolve in the last few years?
A lot of venture has gone into the drone industry, venture capital. A lot of venture capital has gone into the EV toll industry as an air taxi industry. The drone industry has already gone through several ups and downs. Lots of VC backed firms have folded up. Lots of them are quite unprofitable, and only a few have really succeeded and sort of gone on to mass adoption, and they're still in that journey. You look at the air taxis, they haven't been deployed yet, so they're still relying entirely on VC funding to get to market. So they will also go through that cycle of several companies not making it and several others coming later in terms of getting there. But I think there are pockets of this industry that are very real, that are growing very rapidly. Just take the example of Zipline that created an entire medical delivery network in Rwanda for vaccinations and blood. Idea Forge, an example in India for really successful IPO last year with maybe 5 to 6 years of really good sales in India within the drone ecosystem. So you can find pockets of massive successes. Andural is another example. And so if you play your cards right in the industry, play the right moves, then your odds of becoming a big player are very high. You just need to survive long enough and make the right pivots at the right time.
There's obviously been a lot of interest in space, and I wonder if you often see you know the drone industry, and as a result the propulsion industry club itself with that. Like how I see a similar thing happening in sustainability and climate tech, where like I was talking to another founder who was running an agri business, and I was asking him that, does agri fall under sustainability and climate tech? And he's like, yeah, it sort of does. It obviously more under food security, but it's obviously sexy to club it with sustainability tech. And if that can bring in more money into agri businesses, then that's a good thing for those businesses, right? And I'm just wondering if this interest on one side, this whole space part, but on the other side, I think we are just living in a more uncertain world, right? With just the kinds of geopolitics. And so every country now has their own defense program, and they're heavily investing in that, right? Like, do you like what do you make of all of that? Obviously you're sort of in the thick of the action, and do you see that advancing the industry? Because one thing that I know is that it's during times of, like, a lot of innovations that have happened have been like driven through military, right? Like the internet, or a lot of optimization research, operations research, or like a lot of the technology which has been commercialized. The early adopters don't are not necessarily the people who are, you know the end consumers 30 years later, right? Just like, what are your thoughts? Because I'm sure you've studied this space.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Rishabh. Defense and aerospace/space have never been separate since the very start of aviation.
Even NASA, I think, right? Like they do both,
Absolutely.
right? Like they have the
Yeah, yeah.
JPL, and yeah, yeah.
Yeah, even NASA's massive successes in the 60s and 70s, getting to the moon, etc., was to a huge part geopolitically driven in a battle with the Soviet Union. So even Airbus and Boeing and every major aerospace prime, there are periods in the history where they couldn't have separated themselves from geopolitics and playing a role there. Rolls Royce's most famous engine was the Merlin engine that powered the Spitfire, which is one of the iconic aircraft during World War II, and really set the foundations for the company. You can take any company in the aerospace and defense world and point to periods in history where they wouldn't have existed if they didn't make those choices. So we see that as inevitable if we want to be at the forefront of our field. The use cases that are most urgent to the world will be what drives us, and that's where we will see the most innovation. So that's the way we see it. I'm really excited about space as well. That's going to go through a very exciting 10, 20 years ahead. with the cost of delivering goods to space coming down massively, and the size of things that you can send to space going up massively with things like the Starship. So that's going to be really exciting, a really exciting space in India as well, as to what's happening in the space industry there. So, but very similar parallels, but the technology really doesn't overlap as much actually. As a company, we won't be making space propulsion things anytime soon.
Yeah, of course. Any feedback to other folks, especially like in South Asia, India, who are interested in aerospace? Any advice around like how would you pitch the UK? How do we get more smart folks from India to come to Europe? What's the sales pitch to them?
Really good question, and one that I've obviously been thinking about a lot. In that, just in my sector, it's a really exciting time to be in India as well. I travel there so much more than I would have normally done. I'm speaking to really exciting founders there who are doing really exciting things. So I don't think in my sector I would feel the urge massively to have to leave India at the moment. It
That's
is
incredible. Yeah, there's a lot of work happening at ISRO. Just a number of companies that are getting funded, and this didn't happen like 5 or 6 years ago, right? Like people would just like stagnate and be like, yeah,
massively,
okay, let
yeah.
me, yeah.
Hardware and deep tech and so on are picking up quite massively in India as well. And there's a huge internal market there to serve. So there's no need necessarily to come out to Europe as such. I think um, I think the way I've seen the best way to look at it is having a global view. I think that's probably why it may be useful to come out of India for a bit, or to have a sort of outlook that's global. It really helps to be outside of India, and if you're in the UK, to be outside of the UK as well for some part of time in whatever you're doing. So spending some time in the valley, spending some time in India, spending some time in the UK are all important to me to really have that global outlook on how I can build a company. So I think I wouldn't urge anyone to leave India and come to Europe, but I would say if you find the right opportunities in India, you should still travel out to get that outlook, because that really helps, because we are getting more connected globally. And you cannot rely on a certain economy or a certain set of talent or a certain set of investors to build a global business. That's just not possible anymore.
I agree with what you're saying. I'm just wondering if, typically with a lot of industries, right? Every country has a competitive advantage, right? For example, if you take the AI industry right now, right? Nandan Nilekani recently had a quote where he was like, "We don't need to. Let's focus more on the application layer and build stuff on top rather than try to, spend a lot of money on compute and things like that." Because I mean, obviously, like India is a massive economy, but we can't necessarily spend billions and now trillions of dollars on just compute and infra and stuff like that, right? Let for example the US spend time at the infra level, and then we can do at the application level, right? In space, again, I have a very 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 layman's view, right? And I might be completely wrong, but when I look at aviation and space, the discussions that come with India are always around frugal engineering, right? How we sent something for 1/20th the cost, right? And so somebody would have paid for it, right? Like there's a reason you don't have a Boeing in India, right? There's a reason that HAL made the LCA and not a make, right? And so I'm just wondering if for people that really want to work at the cutting edge, and you can have two kinds of cutting edge, right? There can be, how do you do more with less, or like how do you go and sort of push the boundaries. And I'm just wondering if there is, like from that perspective, are there certain things that Europe can offer? Or do you think India is now reaching such a stage where like it's literally like somebody who really wants to be amongst the smartest people in that industry, like it's good enough, or like India is still a great place?
Sure, Rishabh. Honestly, my view has changed in the last 2 years, and I would say it is the latter, in that it is good enough. It is very exciting. you are at the cutting edge, even in this sector. There are startup labs and sort of manufacturing facilities in my space that I've seen in India that will shock the West, literally.
That's
It's not
incredible.
talked about yet.
Yeah.
It's people don't know about it yet, and in 5 years it'll be an overnight success. But the seeds are there. I've seen it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Anmol. Really, really appreciate all the time and sharing your story. And wish you and Greenjets and the entire team all the best. All of us are obviously cheering strongly from the sidelines. It's really inspiring and exciting to see what you're doing.
Thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.